This is a 1972 Honda CB750. Notice the engine is out of the motorcycle and it's been converted to a cafe racer. The problem with that is 100% of people who make cafe racers just mess up the bike, so now it needs engine repairs. Here's the engine. It was rebuilt recently, but makes a loud clanking noise when it's running. The primary chain tensioner is loose because it's too old and has a bad spring. Whoops! The engine must come back apart to replace the tensioner. I removed the oil pan, timing cover, and clutch cover. On the other side, the stator and shifter cover are also off. I took out the bolts holding the engine together, and now I can split the case. I set the engine on its side with a 4x4 block of wood and moved the transmission away from the engine. I can't remove the primary chain unless I also completely disassemble the cylinder head, pistons, and take out the crankshaft. I'm not doing that, and I also don't want to deal with the transmission at all. The only thing I'm here to do is replace the primary chain tensioner. There's only one bolt holding it on. The spring in the old tensioner is 50 years old and very weak. I can easily push it with my fingers. The new tensioner has an upgraded spring made of thicker metal and it feels stiffer. I'm adding a bit of Loctite to the bolt. The tensioner bracket has an alignment pin and is held in place by one bolt. I have the tensioner installed and the new bolt takes a 5mm Allen key. I cranked it down to 7 foot-pounds or 10 Newton-meters because I don't want it falling out. I could take out the shift mechanism, shift forks, and oil pump and take the lower case off of the engine, but I don't want to do that, so I just moved it over here so I can reach the sealing surfaces. I did as much of the cleaning as possible with a wire wheel because it's fast, easy, and does a great job. I cleaned all the gasket debris and old oil out of the engine case with a blue paper towel and compressed air. I don't want any oil dripping on the silicone sealer before it dries. I repositioned the case the other way and degreased the sealing surfaces with alcohol and a paper towel. I put a paper-thin coat of sealant on both sides of the case. Make sure you're not missing any crankshaft bearings, and make sure you have this black O-ring here. If you get any silicone sealer on the crankshaft bearing surface, it's not a big deal, but make sure you clean it off with a Q-tip if you prefer your engine not to blow up. Also remember to put some assembly lube on the bearings so the engine isn't just grinding metal on metal when you start it for the first time. On the other side, I've also applied Honda Bond to both sides of the case. The transmission gear set has 3 ball bearings, and each one has a keyway that aligns it in the case. We want them to be on the engine side of the case to make installation easier. We also want this gear to be on the engine side. Now I can close the engine case. This did not go as smoothly as it looks. The transmission gear set bearings didn't want to line up, so I had to wiggle the clutch up and down to get everything to drop into place. It will be obvious when the case closes. Look all the way around the engine to make sure there is no gap where the two halves meet. Never force the case closed with bolts. It won't work, and you'll just break the case. I'm ready to install the bolts. The big 8mm diameter bolts are holding the crankshaft bearing caps, and the smaller 6mm diameter bolts go around the perimeter of the case. If you forget which bolt goes where, they all stick out about 2 centimeters before you start turning them. If a bolt drops all the way down or sticks up too much, it's in the wrong place. I'm zipping these bolts down just barely finger tight with my drill. Don't torque the bolts yet. Start in the middle and work your way out when tightening the bolts. I flipped the engine right side up and installed the remaining 6mm diameter bolts. One of them is hidden under the starter cover by the corner of the starter. These bolts also go finger tight for now. Wait 1 hour to allow the silicone sealer to dry before torquing the bolts down. This will prevent the sealant from completely squeezing out of the gap, and it will seal better. Use a 12mm socket and torque the big bolts to 18 foot-pounds or 24 Newton-meters. Follow the sequence on the screen. The center bolts are tightened first, then you work your way out to the left and right sides of the engine. I recommend doing the torque sequence 3 times until you get a consistent torque and the wrench doesn't turn when you reach 18 foot-pounds. Use a 10mm socket and tighten the smaller bolts to about 7 foot-pounds or 9 Newton-meters. I'm still tightening the center bolts first and moving to the outside, but it's not as important for the smaller bolts. I also don't recommend using a big torque wrench like this because it's very easy to accidentally over-tighten the bolts and break them off in the case. Use a smaller wrench instead if you have one. The new tensioner feels tighter than the old one. I still need to put these covers on. Oh, and this thing is supposed to be over there.